Hello, Dr. Magnus. Thank you
Hi.
for being with us today. To start, would you mind giving us your name, your department, and the classes that you are teaching this semester, and if you're using open resources to teach any of these classes this semester or in an upcoming semester?
My name is PD Magnus. I'm a professor of philosophy. And this semester, I'm teaching an introductory course called Understanding Science and an advanced course called Theory of Knowledge. And although I'm using one or two open resources, I'm not using a whole lot of open education resources this semester because Theory of Knowledge engages with current literature. So it's largely, and as it happens, lots of that is published in journals and in places that are unfortunately closed access. For Understanding Science, I do use a couple of open resources, and some of these are historical texts. So in philosophy, we're often interested in what historical philosophers thought and where those are early enough, like pre-copyright, there are open versions that are available, and I try to use those when possible.
When did you decide to start using open educational resources for your classes?
So when I first started at UAlbany, I was regularly teaching a course, Introduction to Logic, and I used a textbook which kept going up in price. So it was expensive enough that I had trouble getting students to buy it. There would be students who would not buy it and then wouldn't have the practice exercises and then would do poorly in the course. And but then the breaking point for me was when the publisher increased the price of the textbook and decreased what was included in it. So the edition when I started using it was the textbook and a solutions manual that had solutions to exercises. And then they raised the price by $10 and stopped including the solutions manual and instead included a CD-ROM, which had the solutions manual as a PDF on it. That was the only thing on the CD-ROM. It was unusable and terrible. So I decided that summer, I think this was the summer of 2005, that I was just going to take my lecture notes, which I'd worked up having taught this course several times, and develop them into a textbook. So that became For All X, an introduction to formal logic. The first edition was 2005. I started using it that fall. So there was some work that summer, and then there was development for the course because I had to come up with new examples for class because all of my examples from lecture had gone into the textbook. But it's been really successful. So it's been used regularly here at UAlbany, but literally dozens of places around the world. So when I started using it fall of 2005, I also made it available on my website, and I released it under an open license. And the exact license has changed over the years for various reasons. I started with a more restrictive open license, but then sort of loosened it up. Because in 2005, when I started, Open Education Resources wasn't an acronym that the OER wasn't an acronym people knew about. And I explained this project to people and they didn't get it. But since then, it's become both used a lot of other places, but also people have taken it and made their own versions. There's a guy at Cambridge in the UK who created the Cambridge version of For All X. There's a group in Canada that's created their own, at Calgary, that created a version. And now I occasionally hear from people, I get emails from people thanking me for the book who aren't even using my version of the book, but who are using somebody else's version. And occasionally they'll have complaints like, couldn't you do something this way? And my answer is, well, I did it that way in my version of the book. And what you've got a problem with is this edition that, and in some cases, like partly it's a matter of taste. Like they're teaching slightly different courses, they have different preferences about how to approach the material. But that's a big advantage of having it be an open education resource, is that people can make changes, people can do what they want with it. An early adopter was a guy in Ohio who took half of my book and half of another open education book and merged them because he was teaching a less formal course. So for the formal parts he was doing, he took material from my book. For the informal parts, he took it from a different book.
How have these open educational resources improved your instruction and overall your curriculum? And I think you've already touched upon that, but maybe we can focus in on it a little bit more.
So as I said, historical texts, I've made, there are things that are available in, if not an explicitly OER version, public domain version. So there are things where I've taken material from Project Gutenberg, which is readily available on the internet, and just done a sort of soft reformatting of it to make it available as course text for students. And I've done that in a number of courses. Things about how it's changed the way I've taught. When I started using For All X, which is the open education textbook I wrote, I made clear to students why we were using that textbook and what advantages it offered. And there are I didn't have the problem where students weren't able to engage with the course because they didn't have the expensive textbook. But I also think I got more student engagement with the textbook because it was the textbook for that course. I also, from the beginning, because it was an open education resource, it meant that I could change it, I could edit it. So I told students if they found any errors in the textbook, they could get extra credit, which partly allowed me to make use of them as a labor force to edit the textbook, which helped me, of course. But it also got them to look more carefully at the textbook. And they thought they were cheating. They were like working the system by finding errors in the textbook. They were like gaming the system to help to get a better grade. But really, I was convincing them to actually read the book. So
I think that's
this
great.
This is something you can do with open education resources, which might have some errors in them. And maybe they don't. Maybe they're perfect, in which case students won't find anything. But it's a way of getting students to engage more with the material in a way that they feel like they're being proactive by doing it. But they end up doing what I wanted them to do anyway, which is think more about what's going on in the textbook, what the content is.
Which completely answers, although feel free to expound upon it, the next question, which is what kinds of engagements do you see your students using OER? And that's one right there, right? They're reading, they're engaging, they're helping to look for errors, but while they might be looking for some errors, they're learning a lot more about how to use this OER resource.
And I find also that the fact that it's an affordable resource, the fact that I've made an effort to try and find a text that's accessible for them is something that changes their kind of their mood or attitude toward the course material. Now, I know that, I mean, as a professor, I'm always thinking, I mean, I never pick a reading just indifferently. Like I'm always picking something that I think would be good for the course. But the fact that it's an open resource makes clear that I'm thinking of the students, not just what facts I can present to them, but how is adopting that resource going to affect students? And I find some students just like have a more positive attitude toward the course material because they feel like it was selected with actual impact on them in mind.
Do you have any idea about how much money students might be saving?
Well, when I made the conversion over, the textbook I had been using was up to $85. And because it changed editions quite often, it wasn't really available used. That textbook is probably over $100 now. When I teach that course in a lecture center, there are 120, 130 students. So what's the math? That's what, $13,000? Assuming I've moved the decimal place to the right place.
Per class, per year. That's just one class.
Yeah,
that's just one class.
That's one class, one section of one class.
One section of one class. Yes, per semester.
Admittedly, it still costs them something. So it costs, call it $10,000, because if the book I use is available from Open SUNY as a hard copy, and I think it's important not so. this is something that's worth considering for anyone thinking about using OER material, is that there's a difference between choosing electronic texts and choosing OER texts. The logic book I use is designed to be a workbook. It has problems in it. It has reference tables in the back. It has solutions to some selected problems. And it works a lot better if students have a physical copy in their hands. And that's true for some course materials. Some course materials aren't readily taken up, just read off screen.
What advice would you give to other instructors who are considering adopting or creating OERs for their courses?
So I think one thing is to keep in mind that the decision to have resources be online or on a computer is a different decision than having resources be open access or open education resources. Now, those can go together. You can decide that saving money for students means that people can read things online or on their computer or on their phones. You could also make the choice that people aren't going to get the material as well if they try to read it off their phone or off their computer. And so you want to have people have hard copies, but that's compatible with saving them money by having it be an open resource. So they aren't also paying for the rights to have that hard copy. And similarly, you can end up in situations where you're sharing things online that aren't open education resources, and maybe you're pushing it through the course website, so maybe you're not costing them any money, but it's violating the rights of the copyright holder, and you're just kind of getting by with it. That's not really an optimal solution. Admittedly, lots of people do it, but I think the form that students engage with the material and making it accessible by choosing things that don't have prohibitive licenses on them are really two separate considerations. And you kind of have to make both choices, but it's not that one choice forces the other choice.
Are there any final thoughts you have that you'd like to share with us and with others about open education resources?
I guess I have a thought about making open education resources. I think lots of people, everybody who teaches makes learning aids and handouts, and some of those become like long handouts and reading guides and all sorts of things. We make stuff as teachers. And it doesn't take that much to share what we've made. And if you do that and you put an open license on it, then you make it available to other people. The success of my logic textbook isn't because it's special or brilliant or does anything really that other logic textbooks don't. It does some things particularly the way I like to do them, but the bigger deal is just that it was available, so that when other people have gone looking for an open logic textbook as a starting place for what they wanted to do, they found mine. And in every field, there are people who are going to go out online and look for things to use in their course. And if they found something that you've designed, they'll use it. And then it gets traction and it helps people out. So I think it's easy to not share something, to just use something in your own course and let it go. But it's not that much extra work to share it. And you never know who out in the broader world will find it and either use it to learn about material themselves or to structure their own course and as a starting place for making something else. And I think that's open access is a great opportunity to do that.